What happens when a plane that everyone underestimates suddenly becomes the one enemy fighter pilots quietly start respecting and even fearing? Introduction. Alright, so today we're diving into a moment in aviation history where two very different worlds collided in the sky. We're talking about the first real Japanese impressions of the American F4F Wildcat during the early months of World War II. Now, on paper, the Wildcat didn't look like much. It wasn't the fastest bird in the sky, and compared to the sleek Japanese Zero, it felt almost bulky. But the reality turned out to be far more interesting, and honestly, way more dramatic than most people expect. So let's settle in and explore how Japan actually viewed this grumpy little fighter that refused to go down. First encounters in the Pacific. When Japanese pilots first crossed paths with the Wildcat after Pearl Harbor, they thought they already knew what to expect from American aircraft. In their minds, the Zero ruled the sky without question. It was lighter, quicker, and could turn on a dime. So when they met the Wildcat, many assumed it would fall apart the moment the pressure kicked in. But instead, something unexpected happened. The Wildcat didn't collapse. It stayed in the fight. It kept coming back. Even those early skirmishes left Japanese pilots puzzled because this American fighter wasn't behaving like a weak opponent. It was stubborn, durable, and surprisingly aggressive. The tough shell reputation grows. As battles continued across the Pacific, places like Wake Island, the Coral Sea, and Midway, Japanese pilots started noticing a pattern. The Wildcat didn't always match their Zero in speed or maneuverability, but it absorbed punishment like nothing they'd seen. Japanese rounds would tear through thin-skinned aircraft from other nations, but the Wildcat's rugged frame and self-sealing fuel tanks made it hard to bring down. Pilots in Japan began passing around reports describing the Wildcat as difficult to finish and sturdier than expected. Some even compared fighting it to trying to bring down a moving brick with wings. And slowly, that early confidence the Zero pilots held began to fade into something more cautious.
A challenge they didn't expect. Once the Wildcat started showing up with better trained pilots using new tactics, the Japanese view shifted again. American aviators figured out that trying to dogfight a Zero was a losing game, so they stopped playing by those rules. Instead, they used diving attacks, hit-and-run tactics, and teamwork that made the Wildcat far more dangerous than its stats suggested. Japanese pilots noticed this change almost immediately. They could see the Wildcat pilots weren't just surviving anymore. They were learning, adapting, and taking control. That combination of toughness and smarter flying turned the Wildcat from an underdog into a real threat. Japanese pilots' growing respect. Behind the scenes, Japanese intelligence began taking the Wildcat far more seriously. Pilots sent back detailed notes warning that the American fighter was hard to shake and powerful in a dive. In private, many admitted that underestimating it had been a mistake. They respected its armor, its firepower, and the way it could drop into a dive faster than the Zero could safely follow. And that respect mattered, because once an enemy earns a place in a pilot's mind, the fight is never the same. They had learned the hard way that the Wildcat was not just a target, it was a fighter that demanded attention. The shift in the air war. By mid-1942, Japanese views of the Wildcat had changed dramatically. It was no longer seen as an inferior machine, but as a troublesome, reliable, and dangerous opponent. And that perception played a big role in how air battles unfolded. Japanese pilots became more cautious, which gave American aviators more room to operate. The Wildcat's reputation as a tough, persistent fighter helped the U.S. hang on during those early months when the balance of power could have swung either way. And honestly, that shift bought the U.S. the time it needed for newer fighters like the F4F Hellcat to arrive and turn the tide. So, what did Japan really think of the F4F Wildcat? At first, they thought it was slow, clumsy, and barely worth worrying about. But early battles told a very different story. They learned it was tough, reliable, and flown by pilots who soon discovered how to fight smarter, not harder. And that combination forced Japan to respect an aircraft they had once dismissed. The Wildcat may not have been the flashiest fighter in the sky, but it was the one that changed the tone of the Pacific Air War more than many people realize.